Hello, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Randy Fertel. So, welcome, Randy.
Thanks for not saying Randy Fertile. It's a
I got it
hard
correct. Is that
moniker
right?
to carry around,
Um,
especially to Australia.
Randy, I've have been reading your book on improvisation and love to get into that um, topic with you. Uh, but before that, is it possible that we just start with a little bit um, with your story and some of the major influences and turning points. And I think I was saying to you just before we started, when you're not from the US, I've always seen New Orleans as like a whole country of its own, some other uh, state. I mean, not state, but country within the US.
Yeah.
But can you just tell us, give us a little bit of background about where you're coming from?
Well, it's kind of right that we should start with New Orleans because New Orleans is very much a city of improvisation. We invented modern jazz improv. Louis Armstrong um, invented the jazz improv solo. And Larry Powell wrote a very good book, The Improvised City, um, here in the swamp. Um, and it is like you say, it's utterly unique. We have a joke around New Orleans that to get to the South, we're very much at the bottom of the United States. That the delta below us is, except for the Florida peninsula, it's one of the lowest, most southern parts of America. But we have a saying that to get to the South from New Orleans, you have to go above I-10, which is just runs through New Orleans, but you know, New Orleans is Catholic, it's French and Spanish and black, and uh, the South is Baptist, Southern Baptist, Protestant, evangelical. Um, we eat way better food. They have good food, they have good barbecue, good greens and stuff, but our cuisine is unique. And
Mm.
so I always felt that there was something about me being from New Orleans that led me to stumble on this thing called improvisation as a literary art,
Mm.
and an art that crosses all the discourses. That
Mm.
it's always been with us. It's been with us since the Homeric hymn to Hermes, or of course, Homer is improvised, as we learn. Um, but the Homeric hymn, which I take Hermes to be the great voice and persona, the disruptor, the guy who loves to stir the pot, make trouble, lying, the Lord of liars, the Lord of thieves. He has many discourses.
Hangs out at the crossroads,
Hangs
out
out
of
at the
town.
crossroads. He's probably the devil that Robert Johnson met at the crossroads in the Delta.
And Eric
Um,
Clapton, don't forget,
and
he met
Eric
him there as
Clapton, of course. And so Hermes is my guy, and or any trickster. Trickster's universal. He's in every culture. Um, Dionysus is a darker inflection of him in Greek culture. Um, or has that tendency. He's not always dark. But so so New Orleans, it's really rich. We just had Mardi Gras. I'm not a total fan of Mardi Gras. It has very racist roots. It was started by a bunch of racists in the 1830s. Um, but so I was off in Texas with a friend at an artist colony, and I enjoyed myself. Despite I brought a king cake. We eat our carnival. The French have a galette du roi, the cake of the kings, and we call it king cake, and it's rather obscenely sweet. And but it's a tradition here, and so I carried one all the way to Marfa, Texas, and treated my
Wow.
friends to that, and some New
Mm.
Orleans cooking. I brought my own smoked sausage from Louisiana to cook for Texans, which is kind of the ultimate Coles to Newcastle because they're very proud of their sausage in Texas. Anyway, so
Can I
here's a
just ask
little.
though?
Go ahead.
Yeah, a little bit about. Sorry, this is from my angle. I don't know which way you're
Yeah.
going to go then, but a little bit about your childhood, and you came from
Yeah.
restaurateurs, didn't you? And also how did you kind of get on to Jung, Hillman, that kind of thing?
Huh.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Huh. So my mother was a famous New Orleanian. She was an iconic New Orleanian. She started a steakhouse that became internationally successful. It's the largest upscale restaurant in the world, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. It's got that crazy name because she was Ruth. She
Mm,
bought Chris Steakhouse. So
mm,
um, my father was as infamous as she was famous because he ran for mayor of New Orleans on the platform, wait for it, that the zoo needed a gorilla. That was his sole plank in the platform. It was the Get the Gorilla campaign. And I was 19 years old. Luckily, I was away at college, but still, it was, whoa, my God. Um, but he was a total character. He was an improviser. He was a trickster, but Trickster kind of leans toward con man. In a certain inflection, Trickster's just an outright thief, con man. And
yeah.
Dad kind of leaned that way. He didn't have the highest morals. He used to tell me, hey, go get me a paper, and while you're at it, just take two or three for that dime. This is an independently wealthy man. So yeah, he didn't have the best upbringing. Writing the family memoir, The Gorilla Man and the Empress of Steak, um, I learned a lot about his family and came to appreciate where that stuff came from. And forgave him. I needed a rational dad, and he wasn't that. But
Mm.
at the end of his life, I finally was prepared to accept him as he was. Um, and
Did you
so,
find it hard to write the book, Ren? Your memoir? Was it a
uh,
grueling kind of thing or not quite?
well, it was grueling to get it published. It took me a lot of years to find a publisher, but I got a friend dragged me to this summer writing workshop, and that the stories just poured out of me.
Mm,
And by the end of the first week, my colleagues said, "Man, you got a book here, Randy." I said, "Nah." By the end of the second week, I had the title, "The Gorilla Man and the Empress of Steak," and I knew I had to write it. So
mm,
it was a joy to write. I was teaching then, so I was stealing time from teaching, or vice versa, uh, and then it got stuck in agent and publishing, you know,
yeah.
stasis. But finally, it got published. It's done very well. I get compliments all the time. I had
Mm,
great help with editing. Um, and so, I'm proud of it. It's, you know, uh, 14 years later, and it still gets compliments. So,
mm,
um, but, so here to get us into our story of improv,
yeah.
I've been working on this since 1975. I
Yeah.
stumbled on the idea in 1975, and it became my dissertation, and then it wouldn't let me go. It was this lens that said so much about the nature of creativity and innovation and culture change, paradigm shifts, and chaos, you know.
Mm, mm,
Um, and um, and so, stumbling on something you can't take credit for, but having the sense to stay with it.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that. And it
Yeah.
just kept unfolding, and that lens became more and more powerful in its explanatory power. And so it's very cross discipline and cross cultural, different continental countries and African lore and stuff like that. But and it, academia, where I was not the best fit, because I wouldn't stay in my silo and I wouldn't write on 2 years of Alexander Pope's career. I wanted to
Mm,
write about improv from classical times to the present.
mm,
And they it was at Harvard, which can be a very stuffy place, and
mm,
they really didn't want me to do that, but I was arrogant and
mm.
I stuck with it, and I'm glad I did. So anyway, where I was going with this is that you don't stay with a project for 50 years unless it goes deep in you.
Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah.
In
And
James
no, no, no,
Hillman's
let me
language.
finish.
Yeah, yeah,
Go,
go for it.
it's soul's code of, yeah,
Yeah,
it was a
yeah, yeah,
calling, it was a
yeah,
vocation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a vocation moment. That's good. Thanks. So what I was gonna in reflecting on what's the deep thing in
Mm,
this for me, I
yeah.
realized, well, I had this hyper rational mother. She was
Mm,
very um math sciences. She had a master's in physics at like 19 years old from LSU, Louisiana State University. And my father barely finished high school, and
mm,
he was an improviser. And
mm,
so that the my work about improv is about that conflict between the Apollonian and the Hermetic or Dionysian, and um, the Apollo is among the most rational gods, not in his amours, but
yeah,
he's Zeus's right hand.
yeah.
He is the leader of the muses. Did you know that? He's the guy who instructs the muses. And the muses we associate with inspiration, which is an
Mm,
improv kind of thing. But they're
mm,
also they hold the rules of decorum. If you
mm,
want to write an epic, well, you go to this muse, and she
mm,
has the rules. Mm, you have to invoke the muse, and you have to have a list of ships, and all those rules.
mm,
So Apollo is the rational one, and Hermes is not so much.
mm. I
So
think
so that's
Hillman says
that's where I think. Go ahead, Hillman. Always
Hillman
ready to hear about
talks
Hillman.
about he talks about the cool, distant reason of Apollo sometimes, and I often think of
Ah,
people in when you watch the news and they have people from think tanks or something like that.
uh-huh.
That kind of analysis from a far off distance or whatever. Whereas uh, it seems to me Hermes, or if I think of the Odyssey, for example, it's kind of got that Metis or that cunning or that wisdom.
Oh, it's
You
all
know,
about cunning. Yeah, medic cunning. The Greek word for that cunning intelligence is metus. It
yeah,
comes from Zeus's first wife. He had three wives. We don't usually note, but the first was Metis, and she was an oceanic um, titan, the son of ocean, the daughter of ocean, and so she was a shapeshifter, and she had this medic intelligence. And when um, when Zeus learned that there was a prophecy that his son would do to him what he did to Kronos, he decided he knew that she was pregnant, so he waited till she was in a form that he could swallow, and he swallowed her, and but Titans can't be killed. So she went and lived in his omphalos, his navel, and there she nurtured Athena, not a son, but a rather
daughter.
masculine daughter,
Mm, mm,
who is makes her way up to his forehead, and the other two gods who are associated with this cunning intelligence, this medic
mm,
cunning intelligence,
mm,
Hermes and Hephaestus, go to Zeus and hit him in the forehead, and out pops the third of the medic gods, Athena. So Medic, there's a whole book on it by a couple of French scholars, which is really good, and like Bernant and something or other. But it's the title is Cunning Intelligence in Greek Culture, I think. It's a really good book, and I write a lot. To me, it's the heart of the skill. A comic improviser who comes up with a way forward when his or her partner gives him a call and he has to respond, yes, and that's where that comes from. And it's indecorous to do so. Apollo is all about decorum,
right.
but to create in the moment
Yeah.
without any preparation is just indecorous. What did Horace say? He's in Ars Poetica. He says, you must put your work aside for 9 years before you publish it. That's the decorous thing to do. You'll catch all
Right.
your errors. Well, and an improviser, there are no mistakes. There are no
Yeah.
errors. Everything is that crossroads, is a way
Wh-
forward.
When you say decorous, we could also say scholarly as we know it.
Oh yeah.
Uh, you know,
Oh yeah,
to keep
law
the book
books,
for
it's
9 years.
footnotes.
Mm,
It's footnotes. I was in that world.
mm,
I've
mm.
got my dissertation right over there. Studies in the rhetoric of spontaneity. And that's an important point here to bring up, that the gesture of I did this without thinking, so trust me, is ridiculous on its face.
Mm.
How many times has spontaneity or inspiration steered you wrong?
Yeah.
But the gesture has great power, and it's always been with us, and it's with us now when the orange man says, my gut knows more than many brains. I don't read NATO white papers. My gut knows more than many brains. So that, I had a mentor who read some of my early pages to Taste for Chaos, and he paid me. Excuse me for quoting a compliment, but he paid me a compliment that I really hold dear. He said,
Yeah.
Randy, there aren't a lot of fresh ideas out there, and you've got one of them. Finish the book. So it took
Yeah.
me another 15 years, but I finished the book.
I think, well, for me, I'm just speaking, um, from what I've got from your work is that this link between Hermes, perhaps, and between Metis, I say Metis, I don't know whether that's the
Uh-huh.
right
Uh-huh.
pronunciation, um, to improvisation.
Yeah.
It's that one seems a modern, well, I see it in the modern, jazz or whatever,
Yeah.
but then, oh, yeah, of course, And I also liked one other thing you said, though, and I just can't remember the exact nature of the quote now, but um, it was about sometimes, though, the meticulous preparation that comes, that has been put in before there is that kind of improvisation. It's the most meticulous of
Well,
arts or something.
yeah, yeah. So the paradox of spontaneity and of improv is that
Mm,
it takes a lot of work to be good enough to do it. And
yeah.
so that master of improx of paradox of improx of paradox, Oscar
Yeah.
Wilde said it
Yeah.
best, and I grabbed this right before going to press. I stumbled on this line and I put it as my epigraph because it captures the whole problem, which is spontaneity is a meticulously prepared art.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And Quintilian said the exact same thing in what was that, 300 or 400 AD, when he wrote the his books, 10 books of rhetoric. At the end, he says, all these things I've taught you, the tropes and the topoi and all this stuff, um, the fruit of all that labor is to do it without thinking,
Mm.
to
I think you've
deploy
got
it without thinking.
I think you've got a story there too about a jazz an event. I'm trying to
Yeah,
go back to the beginning of your book where
yeah,
someone made a mistake, and that was the actual
yeah.
what was it? The
I'm afraid
initiation
I'm
of.
having a senior moment. It's Miles Davis and great piano player. And maybe it'll come to me. But they're in Sweden. It's Miles Davis Quintet or something, and this piano player, um, his job is to do his solo and then hand it off to Miles because it's a meticulously prepared art. There are rules within the non-rules of improv, and so he he finishes this solo with a chord he said was like a piece of rotten fruit hanging out there between them. And Miles gave him the slant eye, and he, like, what is? And then he took off and he played a, a chord that made the bad rotten fruit make
Look
sense.
good. Yeah.
And so there are no mistakes. Miles
Mm,
said elsewhere that it's not, there are no bad notes. It's what you play next.
mm.
Uh I found that later. Um God, why can't I think of his name? He has a really charming name. Anyway, so yeah, that there are no mistakes. It all depends on what you do with it. And you know, you I'm an obsessive editor.
Mm.
I don't my I'm told that I've seemed to have learned something from my improvisers, that my prose flows, and but that's the result of toying, playing around, moving stuff around till it feels right and sounds right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that I just love that process. And I can do it all day, every day, till it's right. And it's never right, but it's always
It's
right.
got, yeah, yeah. And I kind of get this thing between your mother and when you're saying that. Like
Uh-huh.
it's not one or the other, but both kind of
Yeah,
thing. It's kind of
yeah,
like
yeah,
or in the jargon of pop psychology, it's not left brain or right brain, but it's kind of can you do you have them both? Can is there a
yeah.
connection between both sides or something? Um,
Well, there's a phrase that's attributed to Einstein. There's no quite proof that he said it exactly this way, but it's something like God's given us a sacred gift, and uh, shoot, I'm a terrible quoter, and and a sacred gift, and then we also have this rational self. We have instinct and intuition, and then we have a rational self, and we have forgotten the gift and
yeah,
celebrate only the rational self.
yeah,
And the point of that isn't just to revive an interest in the intuitive. It's
mm,
that, as in Jung, it's
yeah,
not about uh, just embracing the unconscious. It's about combining them. It's a both and thing. I had a professor, um, a Milton professor, who said all the great poets are both and poets and not either or poets.
yeah. Gotcha.
That's a
And
guy.
And it seems to me the way some people kind of frame up the history of the West or whatever is that, we somewhere along the line we decided to go down this path of the rational.
Yeah.
There was a rational enlightenment, which maybe just means in some senses we've placed a particular priority or value on that. Whereas it seems to me that in the work that a lot of people are doing, they're kind of recovering that other side, the side they had in Greece, the side that that's always been there, the Metis, the kind of intuitive, that kind of
Yeah.
Gnostic knowing, or whatever you want to call it. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, well, maybe we're just more in a position now where we can say, well, there's both,
Yeah. Well, so what indecorousness represents is lawlessness. Okay, if
Right,
decorum is the rule book, it's the
right,
laws.
right,
And to be indecorous is to be lawless.
right.
And if, as I argue, these improvisers bring a richer culture out of their lawlessness,
Yeah,
then lawlessness is part of culture. It's part of the paradigm shifting of cultures. And I'm thinking as I speak, I have a piece to write. So I didn't mention that. Actually, this takes me back to your question about how did I stumble on Jung. I had read him some in college, but um, I was staying with a friend in Paris, an astrologer, famous astrologer, Lynn Bell. We had been in graduate school together, and at the end of the first year, we had Beowulf, a year of Beowulf together. And at the end of the year, she had a free ride and everything. She said, Randy, this is too much rationality for me. And she went in search of her, the vocation, the irrational vocation she was destined to in Hillman terms. And she
mm,
discovered astrology, and now she's world renowned.
mm,
And I was staying with her, and I was so what I didn't mention is I taught the literature of the Vietnam War for many years. I had been a draft resistor and luckily didn't get drafted. My brother was in the war. And so I it was a really powerful body of literature that students related to really viscerally and not just with the head. And so I taught it for decades. But anyway, I was in Paris and I stumbled on it might be still on my shelf here. The Book of the Shadow, I think. Meeting the Shadow. It's right there. Wow. And and I started looking at it, and it was like, oh, this is how you explain America with all its ideals and white 10-gallon hat, how
the
it can kill
hero.
3 to 4 hero stance can kill 3 to 4 million Vietnamese and thinks that it's still heroic. And so that opened Jung up to me. That I started taking him much more seriously. That great explanatory power, because that's such a mystery. Because we are heroic, we are
Yeah,
idealistic. We weren't there for uh, a land grab, um, maybe a corporate grab, but it's another story. But we just keep screwing up, and
mm,
uh, and so anyway, I taught that literature in an interdisciplinary fashion, like I always do, and I would use Robert Bly's poetry and his essay about the shadow being this bag that we place the things that we're not
carry,
allowed to allow ourselves
and carry behind us,
and
kind of the
carry behind
bag
us. Yeah,
we
yeah,
carry behind.
yeah.
And a great intuitive poet, Robert Bly, isn't he? A
Oh
great
yeah,
the kind of model of that kind of what you're talking
His
about.
his Vietnam War poetry is really good. I haven't read it in a long time, but it was really powerful, and I use several poems every year. I met him once, and I had just read Iron John,
Yeah.
or maybe maybe the Sibling Society, and I was struggling with my teenage boys, and I went up to him. I got up my nerve and went up to him, and I thanked him for the book, and he just started off on this rant, almost rant
Yeah.
about the lizard brain. It was it was really, I just soaked it up. I loved it, the
I
lizard
think,
brain.
what I get from him is that I think Jung said, an intuitive can shoot an arrow and totally hit the bullseye, or
Uh-huh.
the
Like
arrow
like
can just,
like like Odysseus does at the end of the Odyssey, and he is the great great grandson of Hermes, and he
mm,
is the only medic human being in the literature. He's
mm,
polytropic, which is many turning, ever cunning, which is what they say about Athena and Hephaestus and
mm.
uh, who's the third? Hermes. So it all fits together.
And I mean, there can be the chance, even with a wonderfully intuitive person like Robert Bly, but the arrow
Uh-huh.
can completely miss and go off into the forest. I think that's what Jung said. So there can be that side of in
Uh-huh.
the intuitive kind of. I mean, I suppose that's one of the negative sides, but
Well,
it's
like I
kind
said,
of
your intuition doesn't always steer you right.
no.
No.
So we get this.
I
So
I
we,
had two pretty bad marriages myself. My intuition, or at least my lust, steered me.
so we're getting to this thing of, well, I'd like to make 2 points. The first is the kind of the really positive side of the mercurial, the hermetic, the
Uh-huh.
Hermes archetype, if I could put it that way. Is kind of like, it seems to me, to live in a chaotic world, you kind of need that kind of,
Yeah.
it's an intelligence of its own.
Yeah.
And transgression, that what you were saying about the decorous, that uh it's kind of like Hillman said, the old man should be an explorer. He should risk transgression. I kind
Uh,
of like that as well. It's kind of like we can get very rule based sometimes, and this is the right way to go about it, and this is the right
yeah.
thing to do, and
Well,
they kind of need.
one way to bring this to a point is the question of what on earth do we do with a trickster in the White House?
Yeah. Well, this is the other
And
side, maybe.
yeah, the dark trickster, a dark
Mm,
trickster is in the White House, and he keeps breaking laws. And in the first, in Trump 1.0, he was breaking norms, unwritten laws. Now he's
mm,
just breaking laws, and he gets away
mm,
with it because what are you going to do? We're just not prepared to deal, short of impeachment. How do you impeach someone in the first month of his second presidency? So the the problem the Democrat, one of the many problems they face is their instinct is to bring law to bear. But he just, just dismisses the laws. So how do you bring Trickster to bear on Trickster? And I don't have any
mm,
quick answer for that, but I'm thinking that as far as ways forward, that's the way forward, not the trying to, because we don't have the Supreme Court. It's 6-3.
mm,
They aren't going to support us. They've already given him absolute royal power. He can do anything.
mm,
It's unbelievable what they've done.
mm.
Um, it's amazing to think how quickly we could fix all this. All you have to do, I don't know if you know about this, and if I'm going to remember, that that Supreme Court judgment that said that money couldn't be restricted in campaign donations. Citizens United decision. If that were overturned tomorrow, then Trump couldn't use his money to, well, Trump's money isn't entirely the thing, but Trump couldn't use his money to supply the coffers of people who would go against, who would run for office. But most of all, Musk couldn't. Musk, with his billions, couldn't supply all those campaigns, and it would be a new ball game. But I don't know how you get Citizens United overturned, until we get a better Supreme.
It begs the question, though. It begs the question with me is that what do you see as the difference mainly between? I think Jung said each archetype has its positive and negative side. So if we take that simple comment, what is the main difference between? Like, I can tell you what I think. I think in the Odyssey, the kind of trickster side of Odysseus, it's taking him back to Penelope and home and wholeness, let's say, in the most simple way. It's kind of like it's aiding him on the journey, and he's guided by Athena, and she's aiding him to get back to
and
home.
Hermes brings him the Molly that keeps him from Circe's wiles.
He gets out of a lot of trouble in those different islands he goes to, and he knows when to move on and all that kind of stuff. But what is you're talking about Trump as the negative trickster, right? So what's the difference between the two?
Well, so here's where my Vietnam studies helps me deal with your question. Yes, Odysseus is charming and wily and very effective. Every one of his men is killed on his journey home. That's not exactly a good leader. And it's some of the things that cause his men's death are things like the arrogance, the hubris that he displays when they get away from the Cyclops.
The one-eyed Cyclops, anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, and he says, "My name is Odysseus, and you thought I was no one, but no, I am Odysseus." And Polyphemus, which means many signs, goes to his father Poseidon and says, "Hey, man, you got to take this guy out." And so that's how he gets shipwrecked, and all his 200, 400, I forget the number, someone's calculated it, die in the service of his return. And so there's a dark side to Odysseus,
Okay. So extrapolating, what is the dark side of the trickster in the present environment?
Well,
similar.
there's lawlessness, which helps enrich culture, and there's lawlessness that brings an end to culture. I mean, we have to consider the end of the Bacchae, the most complete narrative of a Greek god, where Dionysus destroys the royal chain of command, royal house of Thebes. The old king is there, but Pentheus has been ripped apart by his mother. Pentheus, which seems to have something to do with mentality. and he's certainly hyper rational, and he refuses to be loyal to Dionysus, and so Dionysus insists on loyalty. That seems to be a theme today. Um, and the the Bacchae, the Maenad, the Maenads,
Yeah,
is that
maintenance.
another word? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, they are intoxicated by his wine, and that's um,
yeah.
how
They
he
dismember.
he gets that they dismember Pentheus, and his mother um, eats his raw flesh, which is a terrible taboo in Greek society as it is in ours. Um, so, um, and who's left?
Mm,
There's no Fortinbras in the wings coming to
mm,
save Denmark. It's just the old king who's got no power,
mm,
and these women who are slowly emerging from their hallucination, that this was a lion cub, and the Pentheus is has no offspring. There's no king, and Thebes is kind of the Ur kingdom in ancient Greece. Kind of, it feels that way mythically.
mm,
So that's the dark side. Um,
mm,
Improv, intuition, embodied emotion, the sacred gift that Einstein asks us to remember, has great cultural power. So the rational builds the foundation and the walls around the civitas.
yeah,
But at a certain point, you've got to
yeah.
create new
Well, things
foundation. And
become things are always becoming rigid, or
yeah,
uh, as soon as they become rigid, they start to die. And
yeah, yeah,
it seems to me one thing I like about James Hillman is he has that very mercurial quality of pointing out the orthodoxy. Uh,
uh-huh,
like even in Jungian thought, he would say, everyone mentions the word unconscious, don't use the word unconscious because people don't even know what it means. And so it's kind of like that word has become fixed and
yeah.
an orthodox feature, and we need to think
Well,
differently.
except for the Soul's Code, which is a fairly rational book in readability, it
Yeah,
doesn't tax you the way the other books do.
yeah,
I think I began to appreciate James when I realized that he was a trickster, that he
yeah.
wasn't, that it was a performance. It wasn't a attempt to convey a body of knowledge. It was, you were to enter into this the way you enter into a comic improviser's performance, taking the leaps with those very irrational leaps that he makes,
Mm,
um, which are totally pellucid and evocative and
mm,
powerful, but not in the metaphor is not a rational.
mm,
Metaphor means to leap from here to there, and
yeah.
that's what a goat does, right? It's not the most rational of creatures,
Mm,
capricious. Um,
mm,
so and he was. I got to know him. We worked on a post Katrina movie together. He did those movies about cities where he
mm,
would go into a place and he would find interlocutors,
mm,
and they would just improvise.
mm,
They would just improvise.
mm,
And I got to know him after Katrina, and I my foundation helped fund his uniform edition. I think it's called. Is it standard or
yeah,
uniform? I think standard is Freud.
yeah.
Um, and some a lot of those numbers have my name on it, which I'm
I,
very
I
proud of. But
I love that uniform edition. So
yeah.
you got me as a. I'm putting my hand up as a.
Well, excuse me for bragging, but I am very proud of it. But so we worked on this project, and then he was diagnosed. But before he was diagnosed, he let, it was music to my ears. He said, "Don't give me a script.
Mm,
Just take me somewhere and give me someone to talk to." Here's how we began it.
mm,
The treatment began. I had a director and cinematographer. I was all set to go.
mm,
So, we live in a swamp. This is a
mm,
bowl. There's the
mm,
levees on the river and the levees on the lake, and there's a big bowl underneath, which or between them, which was once a cypress swamp.
yeah.
It's below sea level,
Mm,
and um, right near my mother's house in Mid City, there's, I think, the first of several um, drainage buildings. There was
mm,
this guy in 1915, Albert Baldwin Wood, who invented this big wood screw pump, like 15 feet high. And so the film was to begin in the basement of this sewage pump station, not sewage, but catchment. Uh,
yeah.
and and he's holding a tuba, the lowest instrument in the lowest place,
Right.
which he doesn't know how to play,
Mm,
but he sounds a few notes and he says a few words, and then he walks outside with his tuba. We have a band here.
mm,
Um, it's called a tuba orchestra, and
mm,
there are like 15 tubas, and he was
mm.
going to go on a parade with these 15 tubas. So that was our opening. It would have been grand.
And
Then he was
Hillman would love
diagnosed.
Hillman would love that, I would imagine, because I don't know from my experience of Hillman, the soul
Uh-huh.
loves depth, the swamp,
Uh-huh.
the
Uh-huh.
tuba, the gold that comes out of the kind of underworld of the shadow or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, that's very on point. I'll send you that treatment. I
Mm,
have it on my hard drive. It's
mm.
uh it's pretty cool. The one that
You know
got
what's
away.
you know what's coming to mind is that, again, between you, I like how you're talking about Trump as the kind of dark trickster, right? Because I
Uh-huh.
saw the other day someone was treating it like Trump was the Senex. You know how you have the pure Senex thing, and
Uh-huh.
Trump was the old king or something Senex. And I was thinking, I don't think that's right. I see him more as the trickster. But I would say, if I look at, I mean, this is a simplification, right? And the world's a lot more complicated than this. But if I look at someone like a James Hillman, I would say there's that Hermes mercurial wit in many ways,
Yeah.
but it's in service of, he's a polytheist. It's in service of
Yeah.
Aphrodite. It's in service of uh, the gods and goddesses, if I would put it that way. Whereas with the dark trickster, I think that someone's perhaps just living out of their appetites, out of their unconscious, without it being of the service to the goddesses and
Well,
gods.
it's he's pure narcissist, and I seem as there's a lot of puer energy there, I mean, he's very playful. He's always energetic. It's just crazy the energy that guy
Mm,
has. He
yeah,
just won't give up. He's the Energizer Bunny. If you know that commercial. And
yeah. At his
so
age, it's quite amazing.
at his age, it's amazing. Yeah. I'm afraid we indulge a lot in fantasies of his, not lasting, but
Mm.
he's going to outlast all of us, I guess.
Well, that's that. But I think this somehow fits in because I personally wouldn't say Elon Musk and Trump are coming out of that old masculine, old king kind of energy as much as they're coming out of that poor Trickster or Hermes kind of thing, but it might be a lot more secular than what James Hillman is talking about when he's talking about return to the myths, return to the origins, return to the fount of myth in order to get this kind of cosmos.
Well, Musk, who seems to admit he's on the spectrum, um, my understanding of the spectrum is that um, it tends to be hyper rational. So that's how I understand him. You know, it's certainly not very feelingful or
Yeah.
Not a big fan.
And Randy, I wonder, just, as we kind of get towards the end, tell us other things you've learned about improvisation as you've gone along, like working with people, talking with people. What comes to mind? Like, okay.
Well, I just had a conversation with my astrologer friend.
Yeah.
And I told her a story that I've often told, but I had never told her. And it was about what set me on the path to becoming a writer. I went to this good, we call them magnet schools here, is that kind of, they pull from all over the city. So they're called magnet schools, and you have to take a test to get in. And I was very much an underachiever, but always a reader. I didn't want to compete with all these smart people. I had always been the smartest person in the room, but now I don't know, man, these guys really got it. So, but I was reading endlessly. If it wasn't on the syllabus, I was reading it.
Yeah.
And so in my senior year, I took 2 classes with this English professor who was terrible. He was just awful. He used to read introductions to books on, this is the nature of romanticism. He just read somebody else's words. That was his lecture. So anyway, he would hand me back my papers and say, Randy, I know you can do better than this. I know you can write better than this. And he would never explain how. He gave me no pointers. So I went to Tulane's library and I stole an essay. I just plagiarized. I turned it in. And I don't know if he gave me an A+ or an A, but the note was, see, Randy, I knew you could do it. And I thought, oh my God, apparently there is such a thing as good writing. I should try to learn how to do that. And so I told this story to my friend Lynn Bell, and she said, oh, Randy, that was a hermetic moment. You're a thief. You were a thief. So, at that time, I sometimes, if I hit on something I was really, I don't know, sometimes I wrote well, but I didn't know how to fix it if it wasn't good. Eventually I learned how to rewrite. And like I said, I love to edit. I love to revise. So I had some good teachers on all, but what I want to say, and again, it's some bragging, I'm very proud of what my writing has become.
Yeah.
And and I mention it in the context of what have I learned from improvisation. I mention it to celebrate Hermes, because he inspired me to, it all began with a theft.
Yeah.
And I used to tell that story in freshman English when I had to explain plagiarism. You have to teach, don't do this. but I did it once,
Yeah.
and nothing came of it. But it may not be so good
Uh,
for you.
could you just
Uh,
give me the number of that school, Randy? I might give them a call now. See whether they can see whether they can
well,
follow up with it.
I graduated way at the bottom of that class, so they wouldn't be surprised.
But I can get what you're talking about, and I just want to put this in my language also, is that I think if you're a bit of a closet right brainer, intuitive,
Uh-huh.
uh, hermetic kind of person when you're young, I think I kind of stifled a bit trying to fit into the system, and going to
Yeah. Oh yeah.
university
Oh yeah. Yeah. The
and
system wants you to. Yeah.
be and to be formal. Like there was a way of writing an essay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it had to have a beginning,
Five
middle, and end.
paragraphs, and yeah. Yeah.
Da 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 da, and it had to have the right footnotes and references and all that. And it's almost like by trying to fit into that system, the voice becomes very inauthentic. So I would also kind of say bringing Hermes into the writing too is to bring in some of that shadow or transgression or to get some
Yeah.
of the gold from the shadow. So that can come from the personal story, the shadow, the lived experience. And it's kind of like it's for me, breaking through the formality seemed to be the most important thing to start to write something. To get my own voice, my own peculiarity, as someone
Yeah.
would call it.
Yeah. Well, so we didn't get into the neuroscience of improv, but here you're talking about hot cognition, rather than cold cognition. And hot cognition is intuition and instinct and embodied emotion. It's experience. You're bringing experience to that crossroads, and that's why it's authentic, because it's your lived experience that's
Mm.
informing the moment, and rather than someone's rule or someone's
Or
footnote, or
or things that have been handed down for a long, long time that have lost all life, you know,
yeah, yeah,
that's
and their
lost the
luster.
kind of
Yeah,
the guts of it.
yeah,
And it seems to me that the poetic is out, not that I would make claims of understanding too much about the poetic, but it's out there on the edge of the crossroads of being prepared to take that leap into that uh, primal kind of thing rather than just this handed down version.
yeah. So the study of improv takes you there. I mean, to have something maybe fresh to say about creativity and innovation and cultural change, I pinch myself every
Mm,
day.
yeah.
I'm bragging to say that I have something fresh to say, but um, that's what it feels like. I
Mm,
mean, what you want in writing
mm,
is for something fresh to emerge on the page that you didn't know was there. You didn't know you
yeah.
knew it. It comes
Yeah.
out of the experience of the writing and the
Yeah.
thinking. And
Mm,
it's not prepackaged, it's the opposite. It's emergent. And
yeah.
improv is all about emergence.
Mm.
Um, by the way, you had mentioned in our emails, what's his name? The British psychiatrist, with the big books. Mc
Ian McGilchrist.
in McGilchrist, yeah. Um, I feel what I pitched to him, and he was too busy to look at my
Mm,
stuff. But
mm,
what I feel, what he argues there very persuasively is that the cultural, if you look at the history of the West and maybe the East, but
yeah.
if you look at the West, there are these rational periods and less rational periods. And my Taste for Chaos book, the one I published in 2015, which is more of a dead white man's book than the popular culture book that I've written now,
Yeah.
Winging It: Improv's Power and Peril.
Yeah.
Um, that book was like a granular version. I mean, he's a he read
Yeah, yeah,
literature at Oxford. He could have
yeah,
done my book, but he
yeah,
wrote this grand synthesis of psychiatry. Um, but the pitch I made to him was, listen, I I've got a granular version
yeah.
of. So, for example, in the Enlightenment, you mentioned the Enlightenment,
Mm,
and to me, it's always a tension between rational and irrational in improv, and that most rational of encyclopedists,
mm,
Diderot, wrote two books which are pure improv and
right.
which celebrate, Jacques le Fataliste and the nephew of Rameau,
Yeah,
celebrate improvisation and the instinctive, the intuitive.
yeah.
Um, I was in Paris during La Nuit debout when the,
Mm,
the French were in the streets, staying up all night at the um, République, I think, and but I was hanging around the Latin Quarter, and there's a statue of Diderot. I'm going to be
mm,
lewd here,
mm.
as my name suggests I will be. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, so there's a statue of Diderot at the Odeon, and I walked behind it, and on the plinth was Diderot bon toujours. Now, I happen to know the verb bonder from a song that I knew when I was a student there, which it means to have a heart on.
Mm,
So Diderot bon toujours means, oh no, it was La Nuit debout, which means, we stay awake all night in rejecting what the parliament, with the whatever it has done to take away our freedoms. And Je bon toujours means, or il bon toujours means he still has a hard on for revolution. So we think of him as the great Enlightenment figure, but not only did
mm,
he write two books of improv, but he
mm,
inspired the revolution, the French Revolution.
mm,
So
mm.
it's hard to think of him as both and, but he is both and.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
he wanted to bring enlightenment to the dark forces of myth and tradition,
Mm.
and so extended the boundaries of the civilization. So
What I get from what I love your work on improvisation because I think, I was telling him before we started, Tom Peters thriving on chaos or whatever,
yeah,
that what I get from it is a stance. It seems to me that in the chaos of the present time, I could say, uh, okay, I want there to be more order. I want there to be more
yeah,
certainty.
you could
I want,
stiffen your back.
I could do that.
Yeah.
Or I can lean into it
Mm.
and say, well, there's a challenge and there's a response. There's a very big challenge of the chaos, and the response is kind of improvisational. But I also get from you, like, there's knowledge in that improvisation. Miles Davis just didn't go off and do his own thing in a lawless fashion as such. He he even said you have to practice a long time to sound like yourself. It's kind of like,
Oh, what a
it,
great line. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like all the learning is going towards improvisation. You
Yeah.
know, it's a
Meticulously
lean
prepared art.
and it's a leaning in, and it's kind of like, well, why shouldn't I expect chaos? Why shouldn't I expect that there'll be ups and downs or sorrows or and there's so many things which seem out of my control. But if I have that stance, it seems like a healthier kind of stance or a better stance. You know, I think that's why I
Well,
think
I
it's so
I
important.
think it is. I think it is the art of health.
Mm,
It is very much, and once the decorous art gets rigid, it starts to
mm,
die. So, so maybe we could end on this note. So when I came to Australia to give a
yeah.
paper at Catholic University in Sydney,
Oh my
um,
God.
my girlfriend birthday was the day we landed after,
Yeah.
that long flight. So I had to do something for her. So of course I took her to the Sydney Opera.
Mm.
Um, and before I fell asleep, it was La Traviata. And, it starts with a drinking song. It's about the courtesan with the heart of gold who is back from the hospital, and everyone's hopeful that she'll be fine. And so there's a guy who's trying to get in her pants, and she calls for him to sing a drinking song, which is a carpe diem song, right? So seize the day, for
Mm.
tomorrow we die.
Mm.
Perfect thing to sing to someone who's just out of the tuberculosis ward.
Mm.
So um, at that moment, I realized that was my metaphor for improv, because
Oh.
I've argued a long time that improv goes beyond carpe diem. It goes to carpe vitam, seize life, not just the day.
Oh, that's
Seize the
good.
day is very attractive to adolescents,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, tomorrow you die, so grab that
Yeah.
girl. But carpe vitam says, yeah, life is evanescent. We're all going to die, but life is also a cornucopia.
Mm.
It's fecund. It's
Mm.
always refilling itself. Look
Mm.
outside. It's
Yeah.
springtime here. Our live oak trees are burgeoning with new life.
Mm.
And so I realized, oh, that's the mainstream of much literature is carpe diem.
Mm.
Um, life is evanescent. It's
Mm.
a drinking song that you sing to a dying prostitute. Life.
Mm. Mm.
Life is a dying prostitute.
Mm.
But in improv, it's an ever refilling cornucopia, a horn of plenty. So,
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
I like that.
So, what inspired me? Australia. So
That's the
thank
same
you.
with everyone. That happens with everyone. Don't think that's
It's even
unusual.
the sharks, huh?
Thank you very much. And I was thinking of laughter too. It is a great improvisation with the great comics. The Robin Williamses and the Billy
Oh,
Connollys and stuff. It's that in the face, you know, the I don't know, just how the tension collapses, the kind of paranoia about life or something. It's just takes you back
yeah.
into that effervescence, as you were calling it. It's fantastic.
Robin Williams was just phenomenal. And apparently his mind was just pure chaos.
Mm.
And yet out of that came this cornucopian wit.
Oh,
So
of fertility.
yeah.
Thank thank you very much for taking time
Well, this has
to
been one
talk.
of my favorite conversations ever. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Randy.